Live from the New Scientist Labs, Janine Young, newscientist.com.
Joining us in Melbourne City, where it's nowhere near as damp as it is further north there in Australia. Terrible situation over there. Hello to you, Janine.
Good morning to you, Wammo.
Yes, and I'd imagine the most of the focus of the of news information there is on the flooding situation in Queensland.
It's pretty much wall-to-wall coverage, and it has been for the last couple of days, but even though Queensland is incredibly bad, it's also now affecting northern New South Wales, it's affecting parts of Victoria. The entire eastern seaboard is, frankly, wet, and beyond wet. I mean, even here in Melbourne, it's so humid, it feels like Queensland, and that's extremely unusual. Some places are being flooded for the third time since Christmas. These weather conditions are very unusual and very strong. We've got a massive La Niña, as I'm sure you're hearing, in conjunction with a whole bunch of moisture coming down from the north. It's dumping it all on Queensland and northern New South Wales. Yeah,
and no doubt a lot of that will be covered, I suppose, in the future in New Scientist, sort of a debrief on what actually happened and some of the causes behind it, and no doubt we'll talk about that.
Even in last week's issue, we were talking about the fact that it was a very strong La Niña, so we're all across it. We're right over it.
Yeah. All right, well, we've got some three very interesting stories. First of all, some new research that has found that there really is a moral high ground, Janine.
Yes, this is no reason to get too moralistic about things, but it does mean that you have the opportunity to be a better person if you're physically higher. So you can position people at an elevated height to make them more compassionate, to make them more helpful, cooperative, and even more charitable. It sounds very strange, but researchers at the University of North Carolina have been looking at whether or not the cultural type associations that we have, and of course this is going to be Western-based, linking height and virtue. So we have sayings like the moral high ground affect people's actual behaviour when it comes to physically being higher. And they did things like putting a charity collection tin either at the top or the bottom of an escalator.
Huh.
And of those who actually went up the escalator, they gave 16%, or 16 of them donated to charity, compared with only 7 who rode down and 11 who parked tins on flat ground. And if you ask someone to go up a set of stairs to complete a personality questionnaire, if you then try and get them to do an unexpected and unrelated second task, they'll spend 11 minutes on it compared with 6 if you make them walk downstairs into the orchestra pit. So it seems that there is this really interesting association with going up physically and being more generous, more compassionate, more helpful, more charitable. And they frankly don't know why. They've known for a long time that we do have connections between up being good, but they don't know how. They don't know quite how this works in the brain, but it's a really interesting thing that now it's another tool of persuasion, if you like. There's a whole bunch of advertisers that are saying, look, we've understood this for a long time, but we just didn't have the science to back it up.
So, I mean, it could be because when you're going up, you get lightheaded. I don't know, as you go higher, less oxygen to the brain. Perhaps. Maybe if it was the Auckland Sky Tower or that, I think, is it the Rialto Tower? Is it the Rialto Tower in Melbourne?
Yes. There's some, Eureka's even tall. I think that's 80-something.
Yeah.
That's obvious. You know, that's a really tall kind of thing. That's lightheaded. But going up an escalator one floor, if you get lightheaded from that, then I think you've got a few serious problems with your blood pressure. But it's interesting that we have these associations, you know, in our culture anyway.
Yeah.
And if you can actually be encouraged to donate more money simply by going up an escalator, be warned, people.
Yeah, so now I know where to beg.
Well, that's the other thing about it, because if you are doing a charity collection, then don't stand at the bottom of the stairs.
That's right. Next up, everyone wants to know about this. If humans have to travel for space in a long time, can we have sex?
Look, we can have sex. There's just I don't think anything's going to stop anybody having sex, frankly. That's just the way we work. But there may be some implications for the reproduction that happens at the other end of it, whether you're lucky or unlucky, depending on how you look at it. There's been, again, researchers who are doing some experiments. These guys are from the University of Halifax in Canada. And even though pregnant women aren't affected by air travel, if you take them just a little bit higher, there could be some issues with how microgravity affects the developing fetus. Zebrafish And it doesn't sound like there's a lot of correlation between humans and zebrafish, but there actually are. It's amazing how fetuses of a range of different species develop in very similar ways up until a certain point. They've found that the embryos that were raised in microgravity develop cranial defects. So that's the part of your brain, your cranium. It's the bony covering that goes around your brain. Fairly important. They had some suspicion that the abnormalities were being caused by changes in what's known as neural crest cells, and these are important progenitors, so the early stages for cartilage and bone. So they put them into something called a bioreactor that spins objects within it to create a kind of a microgravity. So it's not zero gravity like it is in space, but it's certainly very low gravity, and it still can have impacts. And they found that it did. If they spun them 10 to 14 hours after fertilisation, they found that the bits of cartilage that support the gills and parts of the jaw in humans, that there is a correlation there, they were altered, and these changes persisted into adulthood. So they found that when they were adults, the bone at the base of their skull was barkled. So it would appear that we do need gravity to be able to develop, or at least in zebrafish, properly. And when you think about the sheer cascade and the complexity of genes that are involved in any developing fetus, I mean, it's a miracle the babies are born healthy at all, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah.
You can understand why we've evolved to this for millions of years. To suddenly take us out of that environment, you can see why maybe some cells might not find where they need to be and might not form in quite the right way.
Okay, well, staying with perhaps attraction, there's now been a link made between women's tears and arousal.
Or the lack thereof in this case. It seems that when women cry, when they're sad, there's a chemical inside those tears that's actually a bit of a turn-off for blokes. Their sexual arousal by the smell of these tears alone is decreased.
Wow.
A fascinating experiment in Israel. They asked a group of men to smell these tears, to sniff them, before filling out a mood questionnaire. Now, they weren't any more positive or negative, happy or more sad, that kind of thing, but there was a decrease in sexual arousal. Can you imagine the poor guys having to fill these things out? What people do for science, it's amazing.
Yeah.
They couldn't smell any difference physically in the tears compared with saline, but they were able to look at a series of photographs of women's faces, for example, and they found that the ratings of sexual attraction were lower when men sniffed the tears of women who'd watched sad movies and the like. You know, I'm a complete sook. I accidentally caught the end of Doctor Who, the last series that had David Tennant in it the other day. Before I knew it, I was blubbering in the corner, and just ridiculous.
You were crying on science fiction Doctor Who? Come on.
I was. I love David Tennant. I think he's wonderful. So I was very sad to see him go. I haven't brought myself to watch the new series yet. Anyway, back onto the story. If you actually have those sorts of tears, the researchers are claiming that this is an identification of the word no in the chemical language of communication. Now, this is the complete reverse to what you see in mice. So again, you don't necessarily see the same effects between animals and humans. It's interesting because in mice, male mouse tears boost sexual arousal in females. So it seems that, you know, you've got a sad man, well, I'll take pity on him. I can see how that might work. But the other way round, it could be that, you know, for example, women tend to cry a bit more when they've got their period. And so that could be the signal for, look, mate, just no, not right now.
Right.
Please just go away and leave me alone. I imagine there's probably a whole bunch of other things tied up in that. They do know that lowered testosterone has something to do with this as well. That can reduce aggression. So there could be a number of reasons why, but yes, it would appear.
And also, you know, if your partner's crying during sex, there's probably some issues there.
Either that or it's so good that they can't control themselves. You want to go with that, I think.
Perhaps so. Janine, thanks so much. Those stories you'll find in the New Scientist magazine, which is coming out next week, or of course also newscientist.com. We'll see you next week. Thanks, Janine.
See you later.